Move down, Mom. That sentence, said by my son, Charles, at Christmas dinner, was the final insult. He replaced me with his mother-in-law, putting my cornbread and me at the children's table. I felt small, dismissed, a ghost in my own legacy. But while he celebrated his bright, loud, expensive victory, he forgot one thing. I am Gloria McGrath, widow of the founder. And though he had the seat, I still held the black flash drive with the proof. You don't humiliate the woman who owns over 52% of your company. His Christmas was over. I'm Gloria McGrath, 65 years old, widow of Richard McGrath, founder of McGrath and Sons Logistics, and before we move forward, I'd love to know where you're joining us from. And if you're liking this story, kindly sure to subscribe. The driveway was packed when I arrived. Charles's new Tesla sat right where Richard's old Buick used to rest. Inside, laughter rolled through the halls. Bright, loud, expensive laughter. I held a covered tray of cornbread against my chest, the same recipe Charles begged for every holiday when he was little. "Oh, Mrs. McGrath, you made something?" Olivia's mother smiled the kind of smile that isn't a smile at all. "How thoughtful. We've already got a full menu, but we'll find somewhere for it." Somewhere. That's what I'd become. Somewhere to put something that no longer fits. I placed the dish on the counter and glanced around. The house looked different. My photographs were gone, replaced by Olivia's curated decorations, neutral colors, no history. Even the scent of the room had changed. Vanilla instead of cedar. When Charles came toward me, my heart still leapt like it always did. He was my only child, my miracle after 5 years of waiting. He kissed my cheek, called me Mom, but his eyes were restless, darting toward guests and servers and the sparkling woman beside him. Dinner was served on long white plates that gleamed under gold light. I moved toward the chair beside him. My chair. The same place I'd sat for 28 Christmases, carving ham and telling stories of Richard's terrible jokes. Before I could sit, Charles caught my arm. His hand was gentle, but firm, like he was moving a fragile vase out of the way. "Mom," he said softly, smiling for the crowd. "This seat's for my mother-in-law. Please move down." At first, I thought I misheard. The room fell so quiet I could hear the clock tick. I looked at him, my son, then at Olivia, radiant in red silk, pulling the chair out for her mother. I wanted to laugh it off, to tease him like I used to. "Oh, trying to replace me already?" But the words wouldn't come. So I just nodded, as though my heart hadn't cracked cleanly in two. I moved down the table, past faces that wouldn't meet my eyes, until I found a smaller chair near the end, beside the children. The lights shimmered on glass ornaments above me. The hum of conversation started again, just as if nothing had happened. "To strong women," Charles said later, raising his glass. "Especially my wife and her incredible parents." Everyone applauded. I kept my hands folded. The cornbread I'd baked sat untouched in the corner, cooling beside the untouched woman who made it. When the laughter grew too heavy, I excused myself. In the hallway mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back, her lipstick faded, her eyes glassy with shock. Behind me, through the dining room doorway, I saw Olivia's mother sitting comfortably in my seat, telling a story that made Charles laugh so loud his shoulders shook. That sound used to belong to me, I thought. Outside, the cold air bit through my shawl as I waited for the valet. My breath came out in little clouds, like ghosts leaving the body. No one noticed I was gone. When I got home, I placed the cornbread on the kitchen counter. The foil crinkled like old paper. I pulled out the single glass of wine I'd poured before leaving, the one I'd planned to share with Charles later, after everyone left. Instead, I sat alone and watched the snow drift across the streetlights. For a moment, I felt foolish. How could I, Gloria McGrath, the woman who signed paychecks for 100 men, feel so small? Then I realized, power doesn't protect you from heartbreak. Sometimes it just gives you the means to hide it better. On the mantel above the fireplace stood our old family portrait, me, Richard, and a 5-year-old Charles with chocolate smeared on his face. I brushed my fingers over the glass. "I miss you," I whispered to the man who once told me, "Gloria, never let anyone take your place without earning it." I looked around the quiet house. Every memory still lived here. My laughter, my late-night business calls, the smell of cedar and cinnamon. No one could take that from me. As the clock struck midnight, I said softly into the silence, "You can take my chair, Charles, but not my strength." I woke up to the sound of rain tapping softly on my window. Funny thing about rain, it cleans everything except the heart. The events of last night replayed in my mind like an old film reel. The laughter, the empty chair, the look in my son's eyes. I made tea I couldn't taste and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the cornbread still sitting on the counter, untouched. It looked as lonely as I felt. I thought about calling Charles. Then I thought about how he'd probably answer, polite but distant, voice thick with guilt he'd never admit. He'd say, "Mom, it wasn't that deep. You're overreacting." And I'd smile, pretending not to break all over again. The house was too quiet. When Richard was alive, there was always music playing somewhere. Jazz in the study, gospel on Sunday mornings, his humming while fixing something that wasn't broken. Now, all I had were ticking clocks and fading echoes. On the mantel, a photo of our first company truck stared back at me. I remember painting our last name on it with my own hands, McGrath and Sons. At the time, I thought that name would protect us forever. I never realized how easily love could change its loyalties. Around noon, I checked my mailbox. There was a stack of envelopes, bills, newsletters, and one familiar red envelope with gold trim. Charles and Olivia's annual Christmas gala. I opened it, even though I knew I shouldn't. My hands trembled as I read through the glossy invite card, the long list of guests, and the seating chart printed on the back. I found Olivia's family names, her friends, investors, even her hairstylist. But not mine. Not Gloria McGrath. They hadn't forgotten. They'd excluded. I sat on the porch for a long time after that, watching the rain gather in puddles. My mind drifted to all the sacrifices I'd made, the long nights balancing ledgers by candlelight, the times I skipped dinners so Charles could go to private school, the months I ran the company alone after Richard's first heart attack. I did everything so he could stand taller. But somewhere along the way, I taught him to look down. Tears slipped down my cheek, slow, heavy ones that didn't make a sound when they fell. When the clock hit 3, I rose and walked to my study. It still smelled faintly of cedar and old paper. I turned on the lamp and pulled open the bottom drawer of my desk, the one I hadn't opened in years. Inside was a stack of old ledgers, contracts, and a single black flash drive labeled McGrath Holdings, Private Access. Richard had given it to me before he passed. "In case Charles ever forgets where he came from," he'd said. I never thought I'd need it. Until now. I plugged it into my laptop. The screen filled with rows of numbers, share distributions, legal authorizations, board voting rights. And there it was. My name. Still listed as majority shareholder. They might have erased me from the dinner table, but not from the foundation of what they built. I leaned back in my chair, staring at that line of text on the screen like it was a lifeline. Something inside me shifted, not anger exactly, but something sharper, older. Dignity. I picked up the phone and called a number I hadn't dialed in years. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. "Mrs. McGrath? This is Sanderson." "Yes." I said calmly. It's time we talked about the company. He hesitated. Ma'am, is everything all right? I smiled faintly. No, dear. But it will be. That evening, I made myself a simple dinner: rice, chicken stew, and a single glass of red wine. For the first time in years, I turned on music. Old Billie Holiday, crackling through the speakers. Her voice filled the room like memory itself. I stood there, swaying lightly, remembering a version of myself before all this, younger, louder, unafraid. The woman who could command a boardroom full of men twice her size without raising her voice. The woman who built something from nothing. I whispered to that ghost version of me, "Welcome back, Gloria. I've missed you." Outside, the rain had stopped. The sky was bruised purple, and the first stars peeked through. For the first time since the dinner, I didn't feel invisible. I felt awake. As I locked the study door behind me, I looked at Richard's portrait above the staircase. He was smiling that knowing smile of his, the one that always came before he'd say something clever. "Don't look at me like that," I murmured. He didn't answer, of course, but somehow I could almost hear him say, "About time, sweetheart." Before bed, I stood by the window and whispered into the night, "They think I'm done. They think I've forgotten who I am. But I remember. And tomorrow, they'll remember too." Power, my husband once told me, isn't about how loud you speak, it's about how long they remember what you said. That morning, I finally understood what he meant. The city was waking up when I drove to Sanderson and Associates, the same law firm Richard and I had used when the company was just 2 delivery trucks and a dream. I hadn't walked through those glass doors in almost 8 years. The young receptionist greeted me with the polite stiffness of someone who didn't recognize my name. "Do you have an appointment, ma'am?" "Tell Mr. Sanderson," I said, "that Gloria McGrath is here. He'll remember me." And he did. Within minutes, a tall, silver-haired man appeared at the end of the hall, surprise flickering across his face before turning into warmth. "Gloria," he said softly, "it's been a long time." We sat in his office surrounded by law books and framed certificates, all symbols of power that never had to shout. "So," he said, settling into his chair, "what brings you back?" "Family matters," I replied, "and business, though lately it's hard to tell the difference." I slid the flash drive across his desk. "Richard left this for me. I believe it's time we open a few doors." He inserted the drive, scanning through the documents. His brow furrowed slowly. "My God! Gloria, you still hold 52% of the company. Charles has the operational reins, yes, but you're the majority owner." I nodded. "So I'm not powerless." "Not even close," he said. "But if you act on this, it will shake the company, and your son." For a moment, silence filled the room, broken only by the soft ticking of the antique clock on his desk. "Mr. Sanderson," I said quietly, "my son already shook me. I'm just learning how to stand steady again." We discussed for over an hour. Board rights, dormant clauses, shareholder protocols. All the things Charles had forgotten in his rush to modernize the company, to make it sleek and digital and soulless. "You're within your rights to audit, freeze, or restructure," Sanderson said. "Then let's start small," I told him. "A freeze." Quietly. "I don't want to destroy him. I just want to remind him." He gave me a long look, the kind that carried both admiration and warning. "You've always been the sharpest in the room," he said. "But sometimes sharp things cut deeper than we intend." I smiled faintly. "Then I'll make sure he only bleeds pride." When I left the office, the air felt lighter. For the first time in months, maybe years, I wasn't walking with my head bowed. I passed by a boutique on Peachtree Street and saw my reflection in the glass. Same silver hair, same tired eyes, but there was something new in the way I stood. Purpose. Inside the store, a young clerk asked if I needed help. Yes, I said after a pause. I need a new suit. Something that looks like it remembers who it used to be. I chose a charcoal gray blazer, crisp white blouse, and simple pearls. Not for vanity, for armor. Back home, I brewed coffee and opened my laptop. Emails blinked like tiny lights, formal greetings, financial reports, automated updates from the company I'd built and been erased from. Then I saw his name. Charles McGrath, CEO. Below it, a new memo, partnership expansion with Harland Freight Solutions. Olivia's father's company. The merger he'd been gloating about for months. I read through the terms, my heart steady. He had no idea that every signature, every contract, still required my authorization. And I wasn't going to give it. Not yet. Later that night, as the rain began again, I sat by the fire, phone in hand. I typed a message to Charles, something neutral, motherly. Hope the dinner went well. You looked happy. I'm proud of you. I stared at it for a long time before deleting it. He didn't need comfort right now. He needed clarity. I poured myself another cup of coffee and opened my notebook. On the first page, I wrote in firm, deliberate letters, December 27th, reclaim. Then underneath it, not revenge, reminder. That distinction mattered. Revenge comes from hate. Reminder comes from love that refuses to be disrespected. As the clock neared midnight, I turned off the lights and walked toward the staircase. The house was silent, but it didn't feel lonely anymore. Before climbing the last step, I looked at Richard's portrait again and whispered, "You were right, darling. They remember what you said. But now, they'll remember what I do." They say time heals everything. But sometimes, time doesn't heal. It simply reveals who people truly are. A week had passed since the dinner, and the city of Atlanta had folded itself into post-holiday silence. Christmas trees leaned tired in living rooms, lights dimmed, and laughter thinned into memory. But inside the glossy offices of McGrath and Sons Logistics, the quiet wasn't peaceful. It was the kind that comes right before a storm. Charles sat in his corner office, sipping espresso and speaking with his assistant, oblivious to the tremors beneath him. He didn't know that, 3 days earlier, I'd instructed Sanderson to initiate a temporary freeze on major transactions pending a board review. He didn't know that the Harland Freight merger, his proudest deal, would bounce back into his inbox within hours. I was sitting in my study that morning when the call came through. "Mrs. McGrath?" Sanderson's voice held a hint of satisfaction. "It's done. The freeze is active." "And the merger?" "Rejected. The system flagged it for missing executive authorization." I closed my eyes and smiled faintly. Not from cruelty, but from control. The kind of peace that comes when the powerless remember they were never powerless at all. By noon, my phone rang again. This time, it was Charles. I let it buzz 3 times before answering. "Mom." His tone was tight. Did you touch the company accounts?" "Good morning, Charles." "Mom, I'm serious." The Harland deal froze. "They said the authorization reverted to you. How is that possible?" I waited just long enough to hear the tremor in his voice. "Because, dear," I said softly, "I never transferred that authority. I only lent it." He went silent, the kind of silence that tastes like disbelief. "You can't just—" "I can," I interrupted, calm and measured. "And I will, until you remember what McGrath means. This isn't fair. Neither is pushing your mother away from her own table. Click. I ended the call before he could reply. The satisfaction wasn't in victory, it was in symmetry. That evening, I drove past the company's main branch downtown. Through the wide glass windows, I saw Charles pacing. Olivia sat beside him, arms folded, whispering urgently. Even from the street, I could see the strain on his face, pride cracking, composure slipping. For a brief second, guilt brushed my heart. Then I remembered the sound of his voice that night. "This seat's for my mother-in-law. Please move down." I'd moved down once. Not again. The following morning, I visited Richard's grave, the first time in months. The cemetery was quiet, blanketed in a thin layer of frost. I placed a small red flower at the base of his headstone and whispered, "You'd tell me to forgive him, wouldn't you? To be gentle." I paused, hands trembling slightly. "But, my love, there are lessons even forgiveness can't teach." As I turned to leave, the wind picked up, scattering dead leaves across the marble stones. They rustled like applause. That same day, the ripples grew larger. 3 clients called my personal line, old partners who remembered Mrs. McGrath, not just the company name. They said, "We're glad you're back in charge." They said, "We missed your touch." They said, "We never trusted the new leadership anyway." Each call was a reminder that the world still remembered me, even when my son didn't. By the weekend, Charles's patience snapped. He came to my house unannounced. I heard his car before I saw him, that expensive electric hum breaking the quiet. He stood at my doorway in a black suit, rain in his hair, anger in his eyes. "What do you want from me, Mom?" he demanded. "Money. Control. You've already got it all." "No," I said softly. "I only want what you gave away." "What's that supposed to mean?" "Respect, Charles. The kind that doesn't vanish when your wife walks into the room." He laughed. Bitter, sharp. "You think freezing my company proves something? You're ruining your own legacy." "No," I said, voice steady. "I'm preserving it." He clenched his jaw. For a brief second, I saw the boy he used to be, the one who used to run into my arms after school, the one who believed I hung the moon. Then the man returned, colder, smaller. "I'll fix this," he muttered. "You'll see." "I hope you do," I replied quietly, "because the only thing I want more than your apology is your growth." After he left, I sat by the fire for a long while, staring at the flames. My hands trembled slightly, not from regret, but from release. I wasn't punishing him. I was restoring balance. Through the window, I watched his car pull away, tail lights glowing red against the rain. It reminded me of the night he drove me home from Richard's funeral, how he'd held my hand the whole way. That boy still lived somewhere inside him. He just needed to lose everything that blinded him to find himself again. Before bed, I opened my notebook and added a new line beneath December 27th, reclaim. It read, January 2nd, let the lesson begin. Then, in small letters under it, I wrote the words that carried me to sleep. I don't need revenge. I only need time, and time is already on my side. Pride is a funny thing. It builds kingdoms out of shadows, and when the light finally comes, you realize all you've built was air. For weeks after our confrontation, I heard nothing from Charles. Not a call. Not a visit. Only silence, the same kind he'd left me in after that Christmas dinner. But this time, silence wasn't peace. It was consequence. The news came from Mr. Sanderson first. "Mrs. McGrath," he said over the phone, "I think you should see this." He forwarded me an article. McGrath and Sons merger fails. CEO faces shareholder backlash. My son's face filled the front page. Handsome, proud, but tense. The article spoke of management concerns, frozen accounts, and internal restructuring. I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. I just sat there, staring at his photo, remembering the little boy who used to run to me in his father's oversized boots, pretending to be a businessman. He'd gotten what he wanted. He'd become one. He just forgot who taught him how. A few days later, I received a voicemail. His voice was low, strained. "Mom, I know what you did. You made your point. But now everything's falling apart. Investors are pulling out. Olivia's panicking. Please, just stop this before it's too late." I listened twice, then deleted it. Sometimes lessons must echo in silence before they stick. By the end of that month, his empire had begun to crumble. The office once filled with applause turned quiet. His assistant resigned. His business partners stopped answering his calls. Even Olivia's father, the same man who sat in my seat, had withdrawn his investment. And then came the final cut. The board meeting. It was held on a Thursday morning. I hadn't planned to attend, not until one of the senior partners called me. "Mrs. McGrath, the board is questioning your son's leadership. They're asking if you'd like to step in temporarily." For a long moment, I said nothing. Then softly, "Temporarily will do." When I entered that conference room, the air shifted. The same men who once looked past me now stood up. Charles was there too, eyes red, voice trembling. "You didn't have to come," he said under his breath. "No," I replied. "But I did. Because you forgot what this room used to stand for." The meeting began. Charts, reports, numbers, all meaningless noise against the sound of his pride collapsing. When it was my turn to speak, I stood slowly, steady as stone. "This company was built by integrity, not ego," I said. "And when a leader forgets that, it's not the company that fails, it's the family." No one breathed. Not even him. Afterward, the board voted unanimously to reinstate me as interim chair. Charles remained silent through it all, staring at his papers like they might save him. When the meeting adjourned, he stood up, eyes wet but jaw set. "You win, Mom." "No," I said gently. "We both lose. But at least one of us will learn." He blinked, confused. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means you'll understand one day, when you have a child of your own." He looked away. I could tell the words hurt more than the outcome. That's the thing about truth. It always lands softer than anger, but cuts much deeper. That night, I found an envelope slipped under my door. No stamp. No address. Just my name. Inside was a single photograph. The three of us from years ago. Me, Richard, and a little boy holding a toy truck, grinning like the world couldn't hurt him. On the back, written in my son's handwriting, "I remember now." I didn't cry right away. I just sat there, holding the picture, letting the ache rise slowly until it filled my chest. A week later, the board announced that Charles had resigned as CEO for personal reasons. Some whispered that I forced him out. Others said it was mutual. I didn't correct anyone. He needed space, the kind you can't find at the top of a tower you didn't build alone. When I cleared out his office, I found a note taped inside his desk drawer. 8 words. Nothing more. "May humility be the chair I finally deserve." I stood there, reading it over and over, until my tears blurred the ink. That evening, I sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker across the skyline. Atlanta was quiet, the air heavy with rain again. I thought of my son, of how far he'd fallen, and how far he still could rise if he chose to. I whispered into the stillness, "You can rebuild, Charles. Just not on top of me." The fire crackled, throwing soft light across the room. It danced over Richard's photo, over the ledgers, over the chair beside me, empty, waiting. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel small. I felt whole. The house was quiet again. Not the sharp kind of quiet that comes after a fight. This one was softer, almost kind. The kind of silence that sits beside you, not against you. A year had passed since that winter when everything fell apart. The snow came later this time, drifting in slow, careful flakes that reminded me of old lace. I'd stopped counting holidays by who was missing. Now, I just counted blessings that stayed. McGrath and Sons Logistics was steady again. Profitable. Respected. But I didn't return to the office much anymore. I preferred watching from afar, through reports, updates, and the occasional call from Mr. Sanderson. The company no longer felt like a battlefield, more like a legacy I was finally learning to let breathe on its own. My mornings were slower now. I made coffee, read the paper, watered the small lemon tree by the window. Sometimes I caught myself humming old tunes Richard used to play. And sometimes, in the stillness between sips, I wondered how Charles was doing. He hadn't called. Not once. But through whispers from former colleagues and the quiet network of Atlanta's business world, I learned he was working again. Not as a CEO. Not even as a manager. As a logistics supervisor for a mid-sized trucking company in Macon. People whispered that the fall had changed him. That he didn't wear suits anymore. That he worked long hours without complaint. That he didn't mention his last name unless asked. The first time I heard that, I smiled. Not with pride, with relief. Maybe humility really had found him. One cold February evening, I sat by the fireplace, flipping through an old family album. There was Charles at his high school graduation, beaming in his blue gown. There he was on his wedding day, looking like he owned the world. And then the last one, Richard and I standing outside the first office building we bought, arms wrapped around each other, dreaming too loudly to ever imagine it would all end this way. I closed the album and stared at the flames. For the first time, I whispered the truth out loud. I miss my son. The fire popped softly, as if it heard me. I miss the boy who used to believe I could fix anything. That night, I dreamed of the company again. Not the one in the city, but the old one, when we used to store shipments in a dusty warehouse with cracked floors and coffee-stained clipboards. Richard was there, smiling. Charles was there too, maybe 10 years old, running around with a clipboard bigger than his chest. In the dream, he looked up at me and said, "Mom, when I grow up, I'll build something even bigger." And when I woke up, I realized he already had. He'd built himself again. From scratch. Spring came and went. Summer burned through in a blur of golden evenings and quiet walks. And then came December, the 1-year mark since everything changed. On the morning of Christmas Eve, a knock echoed through my house. 3 soft taps. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, he was standing there. Charles. Thinner, older in the eyes, but softer too. He held a small poinsettia plant in one hand and a nervous smile in the other. "I didn't bring gifts," he said quietly. "I just wanted to sit with you." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us carried too much history, too many unspoken apologies. Then I stepped aside and said, "Come in, Charles. It's cold out there." We sat at the same table where Richard and I used to eat, now covered with a simple white cloth and 2 plates. I poured him coffee. He added sugar, 3 spoons, the same as always. Some habits don't die, no matter how much pride tries to bury them. You look well, I said softly. I'm trying, he replied. Macon treating you right? It's humble work, he said with a faint smile. And I think that's exactly what I needed. He looked down, tracing the rim of his cup. Mom, I'm sorry. The words were quiet but clear, shaped by months of silence and shame. I was so wrapped up in trying to be important that I forgot who made me feel important in the first place. I reached across the table and touched his hand. For a long time, neither of us moved. We all forget sometimes, I whispered. What matters is what we remember after. He looked up then, eyes glossy. I don't deserve your forgiveness. Maybe not, I said gently, but you've earned my respect. Outside, snow began to fall again. Light, soft, patient. Inside, something heavier melted. Before he left that evening, he stood by the door, holding his coat. Mom, he said quietly, I don't want my seat back. I just want my family. I smiled through tears I hadn't planned to shed. Then, my son, you've already got both. When the door closed behind him, I stood in the silence, heart full in ways it hadn't been in years. The poinsettia glowed red in the lamplight, a small flame against the cold. I whispered to the empty room, You've learned, my boy. You finally learned. And for the first time, Christmas didn't hurt. It healed. Some wounds don't leave scars. They leave wisdom, the kind that sits beside you at dinner, reminding you to be grateful for peace instead of applause. A week after Charles's visit, I found myself setting the table again. Just 2 plates, 2 forks, and a small vase with fresh carnations. It wasn't Christmas this time. Just a Sunday. But I suppose forgiveness doesn't wait for holidays. The morning sunlight poured softly through the kitchen windows, gilding the room in a warmth I hadn't felt in years. I hummed as I stirred the soup, an old habit I'd forgotten I had. And when the clock struck noon, there was another gentle knock at the door. When I opened it, Charles stood there, smiling nervously. You said you'd cook if I came by again, he said. And I said I would, I replied. So here we are. He looked around, taking in the house, the framed photos I'd restored to the shelves, the scent of thyme and roasted chicken filling the air. Smells like my childhood, he said softly. Then I must have done something right, I teased. He laughed, a quiet, genuine laugh. The kind I hadn't heard since he was young enough to wear scraped knees and messy hair. We sat across from each other at the same long mahogany table, the one that had once carried humiliation, silence, and distance. Now it carried peace. And I realized something I hadn't before. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting the pain. It's about choosing not to serve it at every meal. After lunch, we moved to the living room. The fire crackled gently, casting a golden glow on everything it touched. Charles stared at the framed photo of Richard above the mantel. I still hear his voice sometimes, he said. So do I replied. Usually when I'm about to do something foolish. He smiled, then turned serious. Mom, I've been working hard. Saved up some money. I want to start over. Not as your son, not as the old CEO, but as a man who's finally ready to learn. I studied him for a moment. He looked smaller in stature, but larger in spirit. There was humility in his eyes, the kind no title could buy. You already have started over, Charles, I said softly. The rest will come naturally. He hesitated. Would you ever consider coming to dinner at my place? Olivia and we're not together anymore, but she's letting me see the kids. I'd like them to know their grandmother. The word grandmother hit me like a song I hadn't heard in years. I blinked back tears. I'd love that, I whispered. When he left, I walked back to the dining room to clear the table. That's when I saw it. The chair at the head of the table, the one he'd once taken from me. I'd said it without thinking, out of habit. I paused beside it, running my fingers along the smooth wood. So many memories lived in that seat. Laughter, arguments, birthdays, betrayals. For a moment, I imagined that night again, the sound of clinking glasses, his voice saying, "This seat's for my mother-in-law. Get out." And I smiled, not in pain this time, but in peace. "You were right to give it away back then," I murmured. "You just didn't know how much it cost to earn it back." Later that evening, I took my notebook, the one where I'd written December 27th, reclaim, and turned to a fresh page. This time, I wrote, January 8th, restore. Then, beneath it, in smaller handwriting, I added, forgiveness doesn't mean weakness. It means I finally remembered who I am. As the night settled in, I lit a single candle and sat at the table again, the same place where everything had once fallen apart. The room was quiet, but not empty. It was full of peace, of memory, of lessons that had taken a lifetime to learn. Outside, the wind brushed softly against the windows. Inside, my heart felt light. I thought of Charles, of the man he was, the boy he used to be, and the person he was still becoming. And I whispered to the empty chair beside me, some seats aren't made of wood and velvet. They're made of respect. And once you lose that, you have to earn it back, one humble day at a time. The candle flickered, and I smiled, because this time I wasn't waiting for anyone to tell me where to sit. I already knew my place, not just at the table, but in my own story. Drop a red heart in the comments if you believe respect is worth more than riches. And remember, forgiveness doesn't mean letting them win. It means you finally stopped losing yourself.